Welcome to track 4 session on human adaptation to a changing climate. Let me first thank the organizers of this session. The first sponsor for this session is the UN Ocean Decade Collaborative Center for Coastal Resilience, which is represented by one of the moderators of this session, Nadia Pinardi, who's sitting here as this director of the center and also a professor at University of Bologna. The second sponsor is a project from the Ocean Climate Platform in France called Cities, which aims at sharing solutions for coastal resilience across ocean cities around the world with 4 pilots regions. And representing is the program manager for the program, Theophil Bongartz. Thank you for being here. And then the last co-sponsor is the Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solution program, which is an endorsed UN Ocean Decade program. The focus of this session is on community-driven coastal climate research and solutions. And in particular, in this session, we have 2 segments that are really aiming at showcasing how community-driven research in coastal areas has led to implementing solutions and co-designing solutions with the actual people that live in the coastal areas. And the second segment of the session is really about understanding what are the new tools, both observationally or other methodology, that are important to fast forward the adoption of community-driven research. And this could include, for example, citizen science and other things such as that. Now, following these 2 segments, we will have some panel discussions, and the panel discussions are really aimed at trying to understand how do we scale and coordinate these efforts that are happening in a fragmented way around the world, and how can we leverage the UN Ocean Decade as a platform to really provide this scaling and coordination of coastal resilience efforts and solutions. So with that said, to set the stage for today's session, we have an invited speaker, a keynote speaker, and her name is A.R. Siders. And let me just tell you a few words about A.R. Siders. She's an associate professor at the University of Delaware and also co-director of a new climate change hub that has been just launched, I think, just this year. Now, Siders specializes in climate change adaptation policies with a focus on managed retreat and environmental justice, and brings a wealth of experience in international community adaptation and national security implications. She's an active member of the Climigration Network, the Ocean Visions, and also the Global Center for Climate Resilience. So with that said, I would like to welcome Siders on the podium for the keynote speech.
Thanks for that kind introduction, and thank you everyone for still being here while there's snacks in the back. So I appreciate it. And with apologies to the people who invited me to give a speech, I think I delivered a title like I was going to talk about equity and adaptation planning, and instead we're going to talk about geekery. So we're going to talk about some geek stuff, and so I hope you're all here with me for the ride. And to start with, I have a challenge for you all. So while you're zoning out, this is your challenge, all right? I want you to write a haiku or a limerick or your poem of choice, yes, I'm a haiku person, but whatever you want, about the future coast or the ocean that you would like to see. This is your challenge. There will be a quiz. You will deliver your materials via Twitter or any other online platform you want, tag Ocean Visions, etc. Right? I want you to think about this while we're going on. All right, and immediately I'm going to throw Manu under the bus, because the reason for all of this stems from a conversation we were having about this panel, and he posed this question. He said, what are the tools that help us think about community-driven coastal visioning, right? How do we think about ocean visions using coasts, right? What are those tools that are available? And my brain, working the way it does, went here. Yeah? All of yours did too, immediately, right? This is where you jumped. I know I'm dating myself, right? With these references. All my students are like, what are those? So, like, your brain did too. And if it didn't, I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes explaining why this makes sense, or at least why it makes sense in my brain. All right? So buckle up, because we're going to talk Star Wars, we're going to talk haikus, we're going to talk Blade Runner, we're going to talk video games, D&D, poetry, the lot. All right? And here's what we're going to start with, the Ocean Decade. Yeah? Why are we going to do this? Because the ocean decade is a decade to do the science we need for the ocean we want. Yeah? Social scientists in the room, challenges with this statement. Yeah? Who's the we? Yeah? And what is the ocean we want? What is the coast we want? What are we working towards, right? How are we setting our goal? What is it? And someone please convince me otherwise, but I believe, with respect to everyone who is working really, really hard to reduce uncertainty about sea level rise or projections on how things are going to work, I think those uncertainties are far, far less important than these uncertainties. I think the reason we are not making so much progress in many of these areas is not because we don't know if sea level rise will be 1 foot or 1.5 foot by 2050 or 45. No, it's because we don't know who should be in the room and we don't know what goals we're trying to get to. And if we could figure out those uncertainties, I think the rest of the uncertainties that we have on more of the natural science side would not become as critical. So, while we think about the science we need for the coast we want, right? Just a second on the we, yeah? Well, this is a panel on community-driven solutions. So obviously the answer is the community. Simple, we're done, move on. There aren't enough social scientists in the room. All right, yeah, right? No, obviously, it's a trap, right? No, yeah. The community will decide. No, right? Because who is the community? Great, define community, yes? What scale? Are we using spatial analysis to define the community? Are we using identity? Who is deciding what the spatial scale is or the identity is that defines the community? This becomes, by the way, communityception, right? Where you have to figure out who decides who the community is so you can decide who the community is to make the decision. And it spirals, right? So how do you make those decisions? Once you've identified the community, how are they going to make decisions? Yeah, are they going to vote? Is it 51-49? We do something or we don't? Is it consensus? Will we ever get anything done? Yes. What are we going to do when we disagree? Who speaks for the community? Yeah. And inevitably we will disagree, right? I mean, we all know this, yeah? You throw 10 academics in the room and you get 15 opinions. So what are we going to do, right? So, okay, so we have to solve this. One thing that's also really important about defining the community is that we know that the person who's defining the community actually really matters. Yes? If I ask Manu to define the community in this room, he'll define a very different social network than if I ask Theophil to define the community in this room. Yeah? Who does it include? Think about your institution, right? If you are asked to define the community, you will define it based on the people you know, the networks you have, the connections you have. You will leave other people out, not intentionally, not because you meant to, but because that's the way our brains work, that's the way social networks work. And so this becomes really critical as a starting point when you think about who is the community, who defines the community actually sets up those boundaries around this. And so I'm not posing this just to be semantic. It actually is a really critical issue to think about who is in the room when we make these choices. And I'll circle back to that in a little bit. One of the advantages of being the keynote is I'm not going to solve it, so I'm just going to pose this problem for the panels to discuss. Yeah? But I hope it's something we think about throughout the panels and the discussions is, with these community-driven efforts, how have we defined the community to date? Yeah? When was it challenging, when was it not? When was it controversial, when did it not become a problem? How do we make those decisions? All right, the coast we want. This one's obviously even more challenging. And one of the reasons I think about this a lot is because this is a figure from the IPCC, the AR6, right, thinking about transformative versus incremental change. The only thing you need to note on this figure is that dark blue means transformative adaptation. You will note that there is no dark blue on that map because there is no evidence for widespread transformative adaptation around the globe. I want to let that sink in. We looked at 1,800 different studies of documented adaptation after screening 40,000, and we found no solid evidence. Yeah? That's a challenge. I think what that might suggest, and this is my hypothesis, is that most people are adapting to climate change by assuming that the coast and the ocean we want is the one we had 30 years ago. They want to maintain what we have right now. They don't want to think about how it's going to be different in the future. They just want to hold on to what we have right now. And I want to think about that because, at least in social systems, that's nonsense. Yeah? The system we have right now does not look the way it did 30 years ago for a variety of reasons that are not related to climate change. The system we have 30 years in the future will not look like it does today for a variety of reasons related to climate change and not related to climate change. The goal of our adaptation should not be to prevent change. The goal of our adaptation should be to choose what change we want, to choose the ocean, the coast, the community, the whatever it is that we want. And this is where I like a framework put out by Schurman et al. They did it in a natural resources management concept of resist, accept, or direct. So you can choose to resist change. You can choose to say that we need to maintain what we have right now. You're not going to do this in every circumstance, right? You're going to do this in a few places where you really care about maintaining something you have. And then in some areas, you're going to purposefully make change. Yeah? You're going to purposefully choose that. I like to pick on my hometown, right? I love my hometown. There are things about my hometown that are worth preserving and worth fighting for. There are things in my hometown that are worth changing. Yeah? Think about your hometown. Do you want nothing to change in your hometown in the next 50 years? Really? You don't want better parking? You don't want better public transport? You don't want more used bookstores? Anything? Like nothing. You just want to wrap it in bubble wrap and preserve it. Almost no one does, if you ask them explicitly. The problem is that we make so many of these goals decisions without ever explicitly saying what we are trying to achieve. We have an internal idea, but we never make it explicit. You're working on your haikus though, right? Yeah. Yeah, work on your haikus, right? Because you're going to make it explicit. All right. And as we're thinking about those choices this isn't a rational conversation. It's not an engineering algorithm. There's no scientific answer for what the goal is for our community or our coast or our ocean, right? This is a hydrologist, Ben Zajcik, who puts it as well as I can, right? It's not a rational engineering conversation. It's a conversation about what we want to be as a society, what place means to us as a community, locally, and as a country. Those are conversations we very rarely have, yeah? And we should, I mean, we do, but we need to have them more. And we need to be very explicit about those goals. This is a figure where a colleague and I started trying to envision the different ways you could use various adaptation strategies to create different futures. So you can blend, right here I like to try and use a recipe metaphor, right? You can use the same ingredients. Has anyone ever noticed how so many foods are really just bread, tomato sauce, and cheese in a variety of different formats? Yeah? All right, but they're distinct, right? They're not the same thing as long as you blend them in a different way. So you can take retreat, accommodation, avoidance, right, and advancing and blend them in different ways to get very different recipes. And the way that you're going to get those very different recipes, the reason you're going to blend them the way you did is because of your goals, because of the values that you had, because of the choices you made about what you want to preserve, what you want to change, and what you are allowing to change. But if we never make those goals explicit, or we never make the futures explicit, then we are making decisions in the middle space that maybe don't represent what we actually want. All right, and so this is where, to come back to the question of what are the tools that help us think creatively about futures, the reason my mind went to all of these science fiction geekery things is that I think a lot of the tools that we overlook in this space are in the area of creativity. And I am not a creative person, but as my Isaac Asimov t-shirt shows, I am a geek. And I will wholeheartedly stand up here and feel confident about telling you about geek stuff. So, I'm going to tell you about geek tools, envisioning play, storytelling, and world building that I would suggest you might consider as ways to explicitly talk about goals and try to create more creative visions of the future, to do more transformative adaptation in the future so that we're not limited to trying to maintain the status quo. All right, visioning. We can start with really basic visioning, right? Literally, look up images, yeah? I like to do this a lot because building a lot of seawalls on the eastern seaboard, right? 14% of the eastern seaboard is armored already. If you don't like the look of that top resist picture, maybe we should stop building walls. Yeah? I mean, we won't, but we should, yeah? If you don't like the idea of houses being rebuilt over and over and over again on stilts, maybe we should stop doing that. Now, I mentioned who's in the room and who's in the community really, really matters, right? Okay, who picks these pictures really matters. I am not a trustworthy speaker. I have an agenda. Yes? I picked an ugly picture of Ocean City, Maryland. Well, okay, I don't think it's that ugly, but some people from Ocean City, Maryland assure me that there are prettier pictures of Ocean City, okay? And I'm told that there are prettier pictures of seawalls. I didn't find any, but I'm told there are, right? So I picked these pictures based on my preferences, and then I pretend that they are objective when I let you look at them. So who picked these images, who thought about this visioning exercise actually really matters, right? Someone else out there, if I asked you to find 4 photos that represent adaptation strategies, you might have come up with something really different. Some of you, and I know because we have a whole panel on nature-based strategies, would have picked a nature-based strategy for resistance instead of a seawall, yeah? But I didn't because I want to make a point. Yeah? So we have to be careful about who we're putting in and what we think are objective. These days, just for fun, my title slide has created images of a future city with a seawall without palm trees, created by an AI artist, Nightscape, right? So if you don't find the visions you want of the future, you can go to an AI artist and have it create visions of the future, and you can then just react. Do you like that? Not? Do you want to live in that city? Is that a good future? Or not? What do you like about it? What don't you? We can watch movies. Oh, I skipped Blade Runner. I shouldn't have skipped Blade Runner. Blade Runner 2049, only climate geeks pick this up if you watch Blade Runner 2049. Has anyone actually seen Blade Runner 2049? Am I speaking to a crowd who's never seen? Okay, good, thank you. So, how many of you noticed that the fight scene between Harrison Ford, right, occurs outside of a seawall that has been built around Los Angeles because of climate change? Yeah, cool. I got one friend in the back, right? Yeah, we're it. Like, they created a whole model, and what I really find interesting about this model, notice the informal settlement of housing that's pushed up against the seawall on the inside. Yeah? The modelers in Hollywood didn't put the fancy high-rises right up against the seawall. Why not? Because that seawall's gonna break. Because we all know it, right? Anyway, is this a future you want to live in, right? You can watch movies and try to see how they protect these futures. You can use virtual reality, right? There's a great virtual reality viewers of different cities that show not only, right, how sea level rise will affect towns and buildings and infrastructure, but also show, like, do you like that seawalled option in the bottom? They also have a living shoreline option. They also have a retreat option that you can visualize and actually see. You know, do you like it? Sometimes it's harder to understand what it would look like in the future unless you actually see it. So there's a lot of tools that help us visualize these things. You can read fiction, right? I'm a huge fan of science fiction, as you may have guessed by now, right? And one of the things that I find really excellent about science fiction, especially the growing genre of climate fiction, is that it is far more inclusive than our scientific community, yeah? I can almost guarantee you that the number of indigenous voices in this conference is lower than the number of indigenous authors who are writing about climate change futures, with no disrespect to the efforts of including inclusive voices in the conference, right? Just that's the nature of where we're at right now. We need to do work on that. But you can think about different ways of thinking about the future. And I particularly like this one because so many of these visions of the future challenge what we think we know or what we are assuming that we want for the future, what we think are the dangers. Other people see other dangers, right? And so having that diversity of voices is incredibly important. All right, so visioning. Play. Yeah? And by play, I mean not only serious games. So, and the disclaimer here is that I haven't played any of these, so I don't actually recommend them. I mean, I might, I don't know. So play them, let me know, yeah? But we could play a series of, so tipping points is at the top left there. You actually run a town that's being affected by climate change, and you have to make decisions about how you're going to adapt this town, this coastal town, to climate change. Ecos is a resiliency, build the resilience of your town through various things. Yeah? The literature on like the effect of serious gaming, I think, as an educational tool is there. As a game for play, I'm not sure. But you know, on the other hand, you could play Floodland, designed by the creators of Frostpunk, which is an incredibly, which I die so often in Frostpunk I gave up, but I have hopes for Floodland. So, you know, maybe we'll try to get through Floodland. Sims 4 has an eco-lifestyle module where you can actually try to convince your community to install solar panels, right? You have to actually run a bond measure. You know, who thought that would become a game? There's a new game that just got funding to be created on climate change litigation. You can now sue the pants off big fossil fuel oil companies, right? So there's a lot of play involved in this, yeah? And why do I think play is important? Well, the psychology literature around play, although there's not a ton in professional and organizational settings, most of it is in younger educational settings, suggests that play actually makes us more creative. My favorite is actually about Dungeons and Dragons, well, tabletop role-playing exercises of non-branded versions. Role-playing actually encourages creativity, self-awareness, group cohesion, and out-of-the-box thinking. Yeah? There's real benefits to playing, to get yourself out of your role. Right? People use role-playing exercises in their classrooms for exactly this reason, to break students out of their what they think they know and their assumptions. And we can use it in our visioning exercises, thinking about the future as well. Yeah? A playful approach, even if you are not playing actual games, a playful approach, which is what I'm trying for here today, right, is an intentional reframing of a situation to make it more enjoyable. I'm not convinced how many of you will think this is more enjoyable, but try. So play can actually be really important for making us more creative, right? All right, you're still working on your haiku, right? Yeah. This is actually a form of play as well. It's doing something, unless you are poets in the audience, and my apologies to those of you who are, right? This is something most of us don't do. But the idea is to try to make your brain do something different. So don't try to project out exactly how much sea level rise or development is going to happen, or right, the carbon-nitrogen balance. Like, do those things in your scientific day, but take a moment and think about what would it look like if you put that into a haiku of what you actually want in the future. And again, this isn't just because I think haikus are fun, right? There's actual evidence suggesting that haikus, right, writing or even reading poetry actually can help with anxiety and depression, which for many people working in climate and sustainability issues is a major concern for us not burning out in the long run. So helping us deal with our anxiety, and also increasing creativity and sensitivity to topics. And because I'm a nerd, it's also a way to grok it, yeah? And if you are not familiar with the verb grok, yeah, this is Robert Heinlein's 1961 Stranger in a Strange Land, yeah, the first science fiction book to make the New York Times bestseller list. And he creates the verb grok, which means to understand something at an empathetic level, to understand it so well that you identify with it and embody it. It is not something you learn by running models or algorithms. It's something you feel emotionally and then understand at a deep identity level. This is what I want to suggest, that writing haiku or trying to think about how you would express what you want in the future in a non-scientific way can help you to get in touch with. To get in touch with those goals that are so implied, so implicit, that they are buried in your subconscious and you haven't even thought to make them vocal, yeah, to give voice to them. So there are reasons to try to think about this level of play. That can be games, but it can also be playing by trying just new things that make your brain work in a different way. If you're having trouble with that, might I suggest some strategies from creative fiction world building? Yeah? If you were going to create an entirely new world, you might start with a key. What is something that is really important to you, or a key threat that you are concerned with? Start there. Use it as your touchstone for developing the rest of that future that you want to think about. Consider your place, consider the history, consider the people. Right, describe the setting, set the rules and boundaries, right? Are there certain things that you will absolutely not allow to happen in your community? Certain things that you absolutely do want to have see? What are the limits that you will constrain yourself to? Will you give yourself resource constraints or assume that they are infinite? Yeah? You get to choose. You then get to describe the setting of your future world. What's the built environment look like? What does the natural environment look like? What's the ratio of the two? What do the people look like who live there? Yeah? You can go back to your visioning exercise and look at those examples, right? Did you like any of them? Did you not? Yeah, they can help you think about this. You can also experiment and play, right? To try to create your world, try something out, see if it groks. If you grok it, if you don't grok it, try something else, right? Try something else until you grok it, yeah? And then describe the community, the culture, the institutions, the economies, the things that are there. And once you have something of a picture of your future world that you have just built, then you can start to think about how do we get there. But that's the last step, right? We don't think about how we get to the future until we have some idea of what that future might look like. And after all, I think about this because what is scenario planning? Many of you probably do scenario planning, yeah? Scenario planning is world building. We just call it something else because it sounds more scientific, right? So this is scenario planning. This is mapping the shared socioeconomic pathways from the IPCC onto climate fiction books, yeah? I can't take credit for this. This is Nicolaris et al., except I substituted one or two out, right? But you can think about it, and I will admit that I don't ever remember what the heck SSP2 is, but I know what Barbara Kingsolver's flight behavior is like, right? And frankly, reading a whole narrative about her world paints a much better picture for me of what the future in an SSP2 world would look like than reading the IPCC's dry scientific language. I think it does for most people. So if you are also having trouble thinking about what these scientific scenario plans, aka world building, look like, you can read the fictional world building exercises for the same thing. Actually, a new book just came out by Andrew Dana Hudson that is 5 climate futures, where he actually writes a short story for each of the shared socioeconomic pathways. So you can literally now get one book with fictional accounts of each of these exactly for this reason, to try to make it more understandable to people to think about it. And that leads me to this last bit, which is storytelling, right? Because it's really important. The way we describe these things is incredibly important, both for understanding our values, for creating trust amongst the people that we're working with, and then for creating shared common values, yeah? And this can start with fun things that aren't even words, right? Storytelling can occur through words, but it can also occur through art, through memorials, through museums, through other displays and physical objects. Yeah, these are just 3 of my favorites, which are the tsunami stones from Japan, right, which, okay, admittedly have words on them, but the stone itself is sort of the point of it being there. There are art installations. This one's in Scotland in the middle, where that bar is where high tide will be by 2100, right, to sort of visibly tell people the story of the future that they are facing. And then you have the Watersnood Museum in the Netherlands, which is a memorial to their devastating flood that led to the entire recreation of their water management system. Right? Those are the names, the white lines shimmering on that mud, are the names of the people who died in that flood, projected out on the mud that the flood washed into this building, and that was left there. And the whole purpose behind this museum is to tell the story of that flood. But it's more than that, because the purpose of the museum is to tell the story of why the Netherlands cares about water management, why they are motivated to continue to invest in water management, and why they do not want to let this happen again. I note this one particularly because in the United States, we are not great at this. We are not great at memorializing disasters. And so we often forget. So how do we create stories that help us think about who are we as a community, however we've defined that, yeah, and where do we want to go in the future? For any of my Zelda fans out there, it is dangerous to go alone, yeah? All right, so one of the challenges I have with a lot of climate fiction and fiction in general is that it suggests that there are lone climate warriors, that you, sir, can save the world, right? You can be the one who takes out the Death Star in a single hit, because why is that an option? Serious engineering flaw. Okay, but like, right, you can do it. You can be a plucky trio with a Wookiee, right? And like, that's cool. You can, I mean, I know I'm mixing my metaphors, but like, you can do it alone. And this is a major critique of a lot of fiction that we have. But how do we write stories? How do we tell stories that are about success and are about heroes who are not lone heroes or trios, right? I don't want to read about a trio who goes out and saves the world. I want to read about a trio who leads a mass campaign of hundreds of thousands of people to rise up and collectively shout out. I want those stories. Yeah? So the stories we tell are actually really important. And I think this is one of the challenges I see in my students a lot, is that they are really concerned about their ability to make change because they are telling themselves the story that they have to be the lone warrior, that they have to solve climate change themselves. And that's just not true, right? And so we need different stories that reframe this for people in the role that they can take as well. And then for my Star Wars literary nerds out there who know that Star Wars was written based on Joseph Campbell's The Journey of a Thousand Faces, right, was the hero's journey. I'm going to suggest that we have a similar climate hero's journey, right, where there's a call to action, a sort of refusal of the call, where you delay or you're skeptical or et cetera. You eventually get involved, you become more involved, you end up in the abyss, AKA, let's move to Mars, yeah? The like dart pit where you give up. Most of us have that day, at least, right? Even if we're not actively planning to colonize Mars, we have that moment where we think, it's too much, what can I do? But then we choose to fight anyway, right? And we choose to embrace the power that we have, whatever that power is. We aim to change the world, even if it means changing it in small ways, even if it means joining a collective voice rather than in isolation. We build bigger teams, we take it day by day, and we end up in a slightly different place than we started from. And what I want to suggest is that this hero's journey occurs a lot, and most of us deal with it probably on a daily, monthly, quarterly basis, you know, depending on your emotional stability. You can guess where I'm at. It's a challenge, right? And so we have this hero's journey, but we need to think about other ways of telling this story and telling people that it's okay, that you are going to have days where it's a struggle. You're going to have days where maybe you feel skeptical. You're going to have days where you build teams. And that's okay because it's all going to be part of a journey rather than a single on-off switch, right? That there isn't a binary, there's an option. All right, so this is why, right? I've got my don't panic. I didn't actually talk about Hitchhiker's Guide, but don't panic is sort of like, I don't know. I feel like it should be the mantra for all climate change activists ever, right? Just like, don't panic. And then we'll do something else. We've got our Star Wars, our Blade Runner, our Zelda, right? Our roll top playing exercises of non-branded names. And so this is my geek toolkit that I would suggest, yeah, of ways that we can do climate change adaptation coastal visioning, yeah, or at least ideas to offer, yeah? Maybe you feel like these are less tools, fine. But ideas to offer that we can do better. At our community engagement, we can do better when we talk about values, and we can do better in identifying our own values. And we can do that by thinking about visioning, play, world building, and storytelling, among others. Because the goal shouldn't be to recreate what we have, it should be to do something different. And as a bonus, I'll leave you with The Little Prince right? Well, actually, this isn't The Little Prince, but Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, right? When it comes to the future, it's not a question of predicting it, but of making it possible. So for all of you who are predicting the future, I truly appreciate the work that you are doing. It is incredibly valuable. But for all of those of you who are also making the future, this is where we have to act. Right? We can't just sit back and say, this is what the future will be. We get to actively choose what it will be. And that choice is daunting, but it should also be really empowering. And so, as soon as that selfie gets taken, I will leave you with my haiku. Yeah? So my haiku is, when the water comes, will you hold the ocean or let the waves wash in? Okay, thanks.
Thank you for this really inspirational talk. I'm going to open it to questions, but before I do that, I just wanted to make a pointer that tomorrow at 12:30, there's going to be a session, a special event that is open to the public here. It's called Gaming for a Sustainable Ocean or Sustainable Ocean Climate. It's really about creating a gaming ecosystem that has science fiction writers, children, and all different actors to really co-design how we can use gaming to better understand ocean solutions. But with that said, do you want to hear some haikus from the public?
I'd love it, yeah. Or
anyone,
you
please?
You don't have to read
Yes,
the
Nadia, go, yeah.
An ocean for all is healthy, supportive, and there for the future.
I like it.
Very nice. Anyone else here? Where? There, okay. Yeah.
A place to gift to our children.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, and for me, the coast I want is a natural, lightful environment. I'm a scientist.
No.
Any more haikus? There we go.
I will also answer questions if that presentation wasn't 100% clear. Yeah.
What do you mean by we? I want us to be the best you and me will see.
Excellent. Anyone else? Anyone took ChatGPT for an IQ on this? No. Okay, very good. So now, yes, questions. Very good.
You can teach ChatGPT to make Vogon poetry for my Hitchhiker's Guides friends out there. Yeah, ask me how I know.
So asking you instead, your progress in trying not to build a dam in front of the ocean, but move the people back. So what is the progress?
Yeah, so we have a whole other talk, right? So we're good. It's a challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge to make people want to move, and it's understandable. People live, think about why you live where you do, right? It's probably a mix of things, like it's close to your work, it's a thing you can afford, maybe it's near family, maybe it's an environment you like. There's a lot of reasons. Yeah, and a lot of those don't go away just because it starts flooding, or because it's too dry, or something else. And so I think there's a lot of movement against this. But one of the reasons I think that visioning is so important, and I want these solutions to be creative, is I think that a lot of the resistance against movement, against this kind of radical change, comes from an assumption that if we do nothing, if I don't talk about managed retreat, if I don't talk about the big scary things, everything will be okay and it will look like it has 20 years ago, and or the government will come in and save me because they'll build a giant wall. And we won't talk about whether or not I actually want a giant wall between my house and the ocean. Yeah, because then the Army Corps goes and does crazy things, like proposes a giant wall to Miami, and they say, oh, actually, we don't want a giant wall between us and the ocean, right? So I think it's a real importance to get people out of the mindset that their goal is to maintain what they have right now. You can see this in Virginia Beach, right? One of the planners there talks about how people are more receptive to thinking about the future when they see it as a 2100 problem. Yeah, when they think about this as a process that's going to happen over a long time, and one piece of a creative recipe, not the only solution and not something that's going to happen tomorrow. And so there's a lot of pieces there that we can use to help people understand why, maybe it's not relocation, but maybe it's something else transformative, is so important. That's not coming from a place of fear, but is coming from a place of moving towards what we want.
Yeah.
we just had a haiku from online by Lisa Miller, so I was just going to read it for you guys. Walk by the sea, watch it change, we all flow and ebb.
Very nice. Are any other questions? You have a question? Okay, we have a song.
Going for the extra rounds here. Do you want to build a seawall? Will it save us from the worst? 'Cause if we don't take some action, sea level rise just may get to us first.
Very nice. I think you really captured the audience.
If my nieces hear that there's a seawall version of that song, I am doomed.
So we are out of time, but if there's one burning question, so we could possibly take another one. Otherwise, I just thank you, Ciders, for this wonderful opening. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for indulging.
Okay, we have a small coffee break, and then we'll start the session with the first panel.